Welcome back, everybody. Hope everyone's had a fun week in their own lives. It's been an interesting time around here for the past week. A few things have happened since the last time that I posted a video. So first thing was that my water heater started leaking in the house, which is always fun. And then I found, after doing some research, that the water pressure in my house is 90 psi, which is way above what it's supposed to be. Like, your max should be 80. So get the fun of calling a plumber for that. And then after I figured out that problem, I tried to go out to the garage, and usually I walk through one of the garage doors and went to open it, and I couldn't get it open. So I went through another door and found that the extension springs on my garage door had broken. So I now get to call somebody to come out and fix my garage doors as well. But in other updates, one little tiny project that I did to clean up the shelf space in front of me a little bit is I bought a paper towel holder off of Amazon. So now my paper towels hang from underneath the workbench instead of taking up shelf space. Like I said, tiny project, but it's the little things for me. So today, what we're going to be doing is just doing some welding projects. These projects aren't really for anything, but the first one that we're going to be doing is practicing some aluminum TIG for the coolant swirl pot that I plan on building for the Mark II. So this is all the pieces that I have cut up. I've mentioned this project before on the channel. I just haven't really done anything fun and exciting to show you guys with doing this. So this is what the finished product should look like when it's fully welded with, you know, some inlets and outlets. But this is essentially what we're going to be doing whenever we get comfortable enough with aluminum TIG. So today I'm going to be taking some scrap, which is all the same sizes as what I've used to make this. I'm going to cut some of this out and just weld this base to it and effectively make an aluminum cup. There's a couple other projects I'm planning on doing today too, but I'll get to those when I get to them, just in case I run out of time. But let's get the bandsaw out and get moving on this one. Safety first here. Had to go grab some gloves so I didn't shred my hands on the edge of the tubing, and then tried to feed this through the bandsaw. If you follow my 44 Design and Fabrication Instagram page, you'll already know this, but I've updated my bandsaw setup to allow for it to be clamped to the workbench so it's not so tippy. You'll notice the big blue C-clamp down there in front of me. That's what's clamping the bandsaw down so it won't tip backwards. Also, I've always heard that you really shouldn't cut tube in a vertical bandsaw, and never really understood why, but I think I do now after this experience. The blade just wanted to rip right out of my hands, but after a couple of snags, finally got into the material far enough and cut almost all the way through it. I had to go super slow to get it started, and I probably also should have turned the speed up because this is the speed that I would normally cut steel at, but I totally forgot that that was even a feature that I had on this bandsaw. Hopefully one day I'll have a horizontal bandsaw to cut tube with, but for now we'll make it work with this setup. After getting it fed through the bandsaw, I cleaned it up on the belt sander and also used a deburring tool on the inside edge to clean up all the swarf. And then I just Scotch-Brited the oxidation off and wiped it down with non-chlorinated brake clean to get all the dirt and debris off, so it is now ready to weld. So we're all set up, ready to weld. So welder settings are as correct as I think they should be. And we got this all cleaned off, put it through the belt sander to clean up all the sharp edges, and then took Scotch-Brite to it, and then cleaned it off with some non-chlorinated brake clean. That's what, the Scotch-Brite is what gives it that hazy appearance. That's what you want for when you're welding aluminum. And now it is time for me to pick up the torch and see how this is gonna go. So let's do it. My plan going into this is to tack one side for about ½ an inch and then flip it around and tack the other side down so the plate doesn't end up lifting away from the tube. But when I start welding, I cannot get the tube to melt and form a puddle. The top plate keeps melting, and for whatever reason, just the tube will not melt. But I ended up turning the amperage up a little bit just to see if that would help me, and tried again in a different spot. This still didn't manage to get the puddle to start on both pieces, but it looked like it was closer to melting, so I turned up the amperage just a little bit more and went back to it. Turns out, third time is the charm on this one, and I was able to lay down a consistent bead. I had to focus on making sure that I walked the arc from each piece though, and didn't just stay right at the edge. The plate that I'm using as a cap for this is a little bit thinner than the tube, so if I were to just stay right at the edge of where they meet, I would end up melting a lot more of the plate, and would end up needing to throw more filler into it to compensate. But after the 2 tack sections, I just kept on going little by little around the perimeter. I honestly expected this to be harder than what it turned out to be, so I was pleasantly surprised by how comfortable I was doing this. If I could keep my rhythm going, I was good, and didn't have any sections that I blew through or anything weird happened. I didn't even get the filler rod or the tungsten stuck at all during this, so I'm feeling confident that I can weld up the coolant swirl pot. I'm also tempted to make a top for this and put a 1/4 inch MBT fitting so I can put an airline into it and pressure test it. I really want to see if my welds will withstand the roughly 20 psi that the coolant system pressurizes to, so maybe that'll be a future project on this channel. I don't really know yet. If you'd like to see that, let me know in the comments below and I'd gladly do that. But that pretty much wraps up the aluminum welding that we have to do. Before we move on to the next section of this video, I'd like to ask you to please like, comment, and subscribe below. If you have any questions about weld settings or anything that I'm doing in this video, please leave a comment below. I'll answer any question whatsoever if you're trying to get into welding, or if you just have any curiosity of why I'm doing something the way I'm doing it, ask away. And please subscribe to the channel. I'm trying to get to 100 subscribers before the end of this month. We are 15 subscribers away, so we are almost there to that goal, and I just need to get it right there over the edge. So if you could go and hit that subscribe button, I greatly appreciate it. Now let's get back to the video. And we're all done, all welded up. Did the entire perimeter. It's still hot right now, so I'm not going to pick that up, but I will show you guys what the inside of it looks like after it cools down. But while it is cooling down, we're going to move on to our next project, which uses this. So I have a whole bunch of chunks of filler rod just sitting around. This is all aluminum, this is stainless, this is just regular steel. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut these tubes down, probably make them, I don't know, 5 inches tall, and then stick them to that and use that as a filler rod holder. So this will only be for filler rod that I've used that's pretty low and, you know, won't go back into the 3-foot long tubes because I'll just lose it in there. So I'll use this, and then I'm also working on a project, or going to be working on a project, to make filler rod holders so I can stop having these big long tubes sitting around, and I can put these in like a storage area that's out of the way, and just make the shop a little bit cleaner and a little bit more organized. But I'm not doing that today. I will do that in a future episode, because that involves PVC and involves me going to Lowe's to buy stuff. So now we are going to switch everything over to DC. The TIG welder, switch it over. Got to switch the belt sander over to be able to do steel, so I'm not contaminating my aluminum belts and all that fun. So let's keep going. Instead of swapping the belt sander over to run the belts that I use for steel, I decided to just get the angle grinder out with a flap disc. My belt sander is truly meant for woodworking, so it just takes a little longer to sand metal, so it's just quicker all around to use a flap disc for this, especially when it's a fun project and dimensions truly don't matter for doing this. As always, safety first when using this stuff, so got the gloves and safety glasses on. The material I'm using for this is all scrap that was sitting around, so first thing I need to do is clean up the ends. So I had good flat spots to measure from, as I want all these tubes to be roughly the same height. I also wanted to get rid of the swarf that was left on the inside of the tube, so used a deburring tool to clean that out. Then from there, I can mark the tube for how long it needs to be and go over to the bandsaw to cut them. I had the same problem here as what I did with the aluminum tubing, that the saw blade just wants to catch on it and twist it out of my hands. Maybe I finally have a reason to buy a cold cut saw, so I don't have to keep dealing with this as I make more things. Don't really know where I'd put that if I got one, but I think it would be a good addition to the shop for all of these projects. But then once I've cut all the way through the tube, it's time to check how square of a cut I made, which it wasn't square at all. So back to the flap disc to knock down the high side and get it back to being close to a flat cut. It takes a few attempts, but I finally get it close, and then this is my janky way of checking it, which is just using some random square that I have on my workbench that I usually use for wood projects, but checks out good enough for me, and we can move on to the other tubes. I decided to take a different method for the rest of these and use a death wheel. Now, I absolutely hate these things with a passion. I've seen them explode before, and it is not fun, so I get out the face shield for this because truly I enjoy my face the way it looks, even though I'm pretty sure not everyone in the world shares that sentiment. I get through the tube without any problems, and then we need to clean it up because this cut is nowhere close to straight. It's worse than what I did in the bandsaw, so back to the flap disc. Safety tip for this one, unplug your angle grinders when you're switching discs. It's not going to be fun when you bump the switch by accident and your hands are on the cutting wheel. But we get it cleaned up and flat. And with that, I just need to replicate this for one more tube and then we're almost ready to weld. The final piece of the puzzle is cutting that flat stock down. This is just a piece of 1/8 inch thick by 1 inch wide steel bar, and I really only need 6 inches of it for what I'm doing, so back to the bandsaw, and it makes quick work of this. It's really nice to cut something that just glides through the blade rather than getting snagged every second. And now we are ready to get welding. So we're all ready to go to start welding on project number 2. So I've tried to clamp this in place to avoid this whole mess warping. So we'll see how well this works. First time I'm ever trying to do this, so I'll report back with what the results are. Also, this has now cooled off. So here's what the welds look like on the inside. Not too terrible. There's a couple spots like down there that I didn't get any penetration at all, but for the first time just to practice, I'm pretty happy with this. Obviously they're not the prettiest. Some of them are pretty good looking, but then some of them get pretty fat and kind of ugly. So it is what it is. Maybe I'll do another one of these just to practice again, or maybe I'll just say screw it and go for it, because that tends to be what I end up doing. So let's get to welding some more stuff. I didn't really know what tube I should have started with, as I knew they were all going to get in my way as I went around, so I decided to start in the center. No matter what order I went in, there was going to be 2 times that I had tubes in my way. So plan of attack here was just like what I typically do, and that is tack it in 2 places so it doesn't try to lift up on me, and then fully weld it. I don't do a ton of welding on mild steel, so it was kind of nice how easy it was to weld this stuff, and clamping it in place was definitely the right call. That piece that I'm using on the top is called a 1-2-3 block, and that's because one side is 1 inch wide, the other side is 2 inches wide, and as you might have guessed, the third side is 3 inches wide. They're super helpful for things like this because they're very precise and flat blocks, and I have a pair of them that I got off of Amazon for like 20 bucks. Some people might say that they're not very good because they're Amazon tools, but they do the job and they're cheap enough that I don't care that I'm welding near them. Once I had 2 tacks on it, I figured it would be good enough to remove the clamp. I really didn't feel like having to keep readjusting that clamp as I went around the tube, and it worked out because this really didn't warp at all. You'll also notice that I basically make a mini chimney as I was welding with all the smoke pouring out of the top of this. Also, as we go through this, let me know what view you like for these welding videos. I set up the camera this time way higher to get a more overhead shot for these clips, and I really don't know how I feel about it because I feel like you can't see as much detail, but at the same time, the over-the-shoulder style camera angle that I usually use, that ends up with my hands being in the way a lot of the time. So give me your opinion down in the comments. I'd love to hear some feedback on this. One of the concerns I had with this was how I was going to do the sides of the tube where it basically lines up perfectly with the edge of the flat stock. I didn't know how it would look going from a fillet weld basically to a butt weld and then back to a fillet weld. I also didn't want to melt the flat stock too much and have it just look funny or get super sunk in. I think I got better with it the more I did it, but I was happy with how all these welds came out. But that wraps up the first tube, and now it's time to clamp in the second tube and tack it to the flat stock. One thing that I didn't think to pay attention to when I was clamping it was what end of the clamp I was putting close to where I was welding. You'll notice right here that I have the painted end of the clamp right there beside the weld, which in hindsight wasn't a good idea. I didn't even think to pay attention to that until after the paint burned up in my face and I breathed in those fumes. Tasted absolutely terrible, and of course contaminated the tungsten. Of course, my head is in the way now instead of my hands, so let's skip ahead to fully welding this in. I had to be a little creative with fitting the torch and the filler rod into these tight areas, but it was good practice for awkward welding. The outside corners were also kind of difficult just because there wasn't a lot of material there on the flat stock, so it got hot really quick and then wanted to just melt away super fast. One thing I forgot to mention earlier is that to prep this steel to weld, they all have some sort of anti-corrosion coating on it. So I had to take that off of the flap disc as well. That's why you'll notice on the tubes, the bottom inch of the tube looks different than the top portion. And I also did the same thing to the flat stock. It's just harder to notice that the color difference on the flat stock because the anti-corrosion coating was basically the same color as the steel. But took it all off the flap disc to prep it all to weld. And really mild steel is pretty forgiving, so you don't have to be super clean with it like how I am with aluminum and stainless steel. That gets us through 2 tubes, and now I just have 1 left. I'm going to skip ahead to the difficult parts because really the rest is the same as what you've already watched me do. Trying to fit my torch into these tubes and still have room to move the torch enough to weld was basically impossible. I didn't really think about how big my torch was when I decided to basically leave 1-inch gaps between each tube, but this made me do some awkward things like weld basically blind and also weld away from my filler rod. Normally when I weld into or towards my filler rod as I find it easier to keep dipping the filler rod into the puddle that way, but here I had to do that the opposite way, which I didn't like, but it ended up working out. So project number 2 is all wrapped up. So did well. I honestly don't weld just regular mild steel tube very often, or I don't TIG weld mild steel very often at all. So it took a little bit getting used to, but it was all right. I don't know if you guys are going to be able to see this, but you can see I got good penetration all the way down there in every tube. So Not like it really matters for this. It's just a fun little appearance piece. This is all it's really meant for the rest of its life, so really didn't need, you know, structurally well welds. It's just gonna hold sticks of filler, so a little bit overkill, but I wanted to weld something. I wanted to get out in the garage and do something fun. So unfortunately, we did have a third project lined up, and I'm going to go over and show you what it was and why we also can't do it. So let's walk over to the Mark II. So the plan was to weld the exhaust tip onto this. I did the exhaust for this car when I was still in college. It was the first stainless steel that I ever did, hence the boogers right there. It's also not back purged at all, so it's sugared all over on the inside, and I'm sure one day I'll redo it, but today's not that day. What I wanted to do is I wanted to put this exhaust tip on. Let's do this, because when I built this, I didn't have a welder at home. If it came down to it, I was going to end up marking it with Sharpie and then just welding it on. But I really didn't like that. I wanted the exhaust tip to fit really well, and there's a tiny cutout there that I wanted it to line up with. But since sliding this on, what I've come to realize is because the engine is not mounted into the chassis properly and it's just hanging from the engine hoist, that exhaust is not where it's supposed to be. It normally does not hang down that low, nor does it come out that far. You can see when I walked around the car at first that the exhaust tip was like freaking 6 inches past the bumper. It's not normally like that. So I can't weld it on until I put the transmission back together, which sucks. But it is what it is. I'd rather it look proper rather than me rushing through something and just welding it on just to cut it off. And like I said, I might end up redoing that exhaust because I'm not super happy with it. There's sections of it that I don't like. So who knows, maybe that'll be one of the projects on the board. But for now, that's going to wrap this up. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing, and we'll see everybody next time.